Hey guys, tonight we journey back to feudal Japan, where the katana gleams in the early morning light and the mist rises from bamboo forests around the dojo. Your modern body, accustomed to memory foam mattresses and gentle morning alarms, is about to be thrust into the most demanding apprenticeship history has to offer. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive past breakfast, but we're going to walk through the entire brutal day anyway, just to see exactly how and when you'd break. If this is helping your restless mind slow down, gently tap that like button and subscribe to our historical sleep journeys. I invite you to share your location and local time in the comments so we can know where our community of dreamers is joining us from. Now, prepare your environment. Reduce the brightness of your room. Rest your eyes momentarily while taking 3 deep breaths. And let's gently navigate together through this narrative that will lead us to rest. Your day as a samurai apprentice begins long before the sun considers making an appearance. As the stars still hold dominion over the night sky, a wooden clapper sounds outside your sleeping quarters. It's 4:30 a.m., though in Edo period Japan, you'd use a different time system entirely. Historians note that samurai typically rose at the hour of the tiger, roughly 3 to 5 a.m. in modern time. You're expected to be fully alert, dressed, and kneeling in position within 3 minutes. Not the 30 minutes you normally take to check your phone, hit snooze twice, and reluctantly drag yourself toward coffee. There is no coffee here. There is no snooze. There is only the immediate transition from sleep to attentiveness, a skill developed through years of discipline that you simply don't possess. Your sleeping mat, a thin straw tatami that would give modern chiropractors nightmares, must be perfectly folded and stored before you exit. This isn't a quick sheet tuck. This is a precise ritual with exact folding methods that demonstrate respect for the materials and space. Your clumsy, sleep-addled fingers fumble with the unfamiliar task, already putting you behind. Outside, regardless of weather, be it snow, rain, or sweltering humidity, you're expected to perform misogi, a purification ritual involving cold water. Hope you enjoy hypothermia for breakfast. You pour buckets of frigid water over your body, the shock causing your untrained modern nervous system to gasp involuntarily. Your samurai peers, conditioned since childhood, barely flinch. The water temperature, particularly in winter months, could drop to near freezing. Some historical accounts suggest apprentices would sometimes break sheets of ice to access the purification water during deep winter. The cold water ritual serves multiple purposes. Purification, certainly, but also wakening the body and spirit. Scholars still debate whether this practice was primarily religious in nature, or if it served a more practical purpose in developing physical resilience. Either way, your pampered skin, accustomed to hot showers and gentle pH-balanced soaps, screams in protest. Now shivering, you're led to the training grounds for asataiso, morning exercises. But if you're picturing gentle stretching or a light jog, think again. These exercises involve deep squats while holding heavy wooden buckets of water, striking posts with your forearms until they're red and swollen, and performing hundreds of subari, practice sword swings with a wooden weapon that weighs significantly more than the actual katana. This builds the correct muscles, your instructor explains without sympathy, as your arms begin to shake uncontrollably after just 20 repetitions. The other apprentices are on their second 100 without breaking rhythm. By the 50th swing, your shoulders are on fire. By the 75th, you can no longer feel your hands. Modern exercise science actually confirms this approach. These weighted training tools build specific muscle memory and strength, though today we might incorporate more recovery time. Your breathing is chaotic, gasping, and irregular. while the senior students maintain a controlled, meditative rhythm. One particularly quirky training method involves chanting specific mantras in time with each breath and movement, coordinating the body's energy flow according to principles that would take years to fully comprehend. The morning exercises last a full hour, targeting every muscle group with methodical precision. Modern athletes typically focus on specific muscle groups each day to allow for recovery. You get no such luxury. By the time the wooden clapper sounds again to signal the end of morning training, your untrained body has already reached its limit, and the real training hasn't even begun. As the first hints of dawn finally color the sky, you collapse to your knees, muscles quivering, lungs burning. The senior student beside you looks down and whispers with the faintest hint of amusement, "That was just the warm-up." The hunger gnawing at your stomach provides momentary hope. Surely breakfast will offer some comfort after the brutal morning exercises. How wrong you are. The meal is served in the common hall, where you kneel in precise formation according to rank. As the newest and lowest apprentice, you're positioned farthest from the master, near the door, the least honorable spot, and, not coincidentally, the draftiest and coldest. Your breakfast arrives on a lacquered tray, a small bowl of plain rice, a portion of pickled vegetables, perhaps a sliver of dried fish, and a cup of bitter green tea. No sugar, no coffee, no pastries. The entire meal contains fewer calories than your usual morning latte. Historians confirm that samurai diets, while nutritionally balanced, were deliberately austere, part of the disciplined lifestyle and practical necessity in a society where food production was labor-intensive. But before you can dive in to satiate your growing hunger, you must observe the proper etiquette. The senior student next to you hisses instructions under his breath, clearly annoyed at having to guide such an obvious novice. Bow to the food, express gratitude, hold chopsticks correctly, never stick them upright in rice, that's only for funerals. You fumble with the unfamiliar chopsticks, dropping rice grains onto the pristine tatami, a minor transgression that earns you a sharp rap on the knuckles from a passing senior. The proper way to hold chopsticks requires specific finger positioning that modern hands, more accustomed to swiping screens than manipulating wooden utensils with precision, find extraordinarily difficult to maintain. "Eat everything," the senior student whispers. Leaving food is disrespectful to the farmers who grew it and the cook who prepared it. This isn't just etiquette, it's philosophical. The concept of mottainai, wastelessness, runs deep in Japanese culture, particularly in warrior households where resources were valued. Some fringe historical accounts even suggest samurai households would keep track of grain consumption, considering excessive eating a form of moral weakness. You notice everyone eats in near silence, with no conversation or distractions. Eating itself is a meditative practice, each bite taken with awareness and gratitude. Your mind, accustomed to scrolling through social media while mindlessly consuming breakfast, struggles with this singular focus. The blandness of the food doesn't help. The rice has no salt, the pickles are mouth-puckeringly sour, and the tea is so bitter you nearly gag. "The food is deliberately plain," explains an older apprentice when he notices your expression. "Samurai must not grow dependent on strong flavors or excessive portions. In battle, you may go days with minimal sustenance. Your body must be trained to function optimally regardless of what fuel it receives." Modern nutritionists might actually approve of certain aspects of this diet: the balanced macronutrients, fermented foods for gut health, and portion control. But your body, accustomed to sugar, caffeine, and significantly larger portions, interprets this meal as basically starvation. Your stomach continues to growl embarrassingly throughout the meal. The eating itself follows a precise ritual. Each food must be consumed in a specific order and manner. Rice is eaten in small, measured bites, not the heaping scoops you're attempting. Tea is sipped with specific hand positions and at certain intervals. Even the placement of bowls when finished follows strict protocol. Historians still debate whether these elaborate dining customs evolved primarily for practical discipline or as status markers that distinguished warrior households from commoners. As you struggle through these unfamiliar protocols, you notice other apprentices have already finished their meals and are waiting patiently, back straight, despite having just completed the same grueling morning exercises that have left you trembling. Their bowls are spotless, not a grain of rice remains, and positioned correctly on their trays. You rush to finish, which earns you another sharp look from the master at the head of the room. Eating quickly is seen as animalistic and undignified. The concept of mindful eating that modern wellness influencers charge subscription fees to teach was simply standard practice in the samurai household. Every action, even something as basic as consuming food, was an opportunity to demonstrate discipline and proper form. Finally finishing, you clumsily attempt to arrange your bowls as you've seen others do. The senior apprentice sighs audibly at your pitiful attempt and makes a subtle correction to your arrangement before it can be noticed by the master. After the meal, apprentices rinse their own bowls and utensils in a precise manner. Another ritual with specific movements and purpose. No dishwashers here, and certainly no leaving your plate for someone else to clean. The wooden rice bowl must be rinsed with hot water, but never soap, a particularly quirky tradition that helps season the wood and prevent flavors from lingering. As the breakfast ritual concludes, you realize with dismay that what you considered a basic human function, eating, is actually an elaborate performance for which you lack both the script and the skills. Your stomach is still growling, your energy levels nowhere near replenished for what's to come, and you've already committed at least 7 etiquette breaches that have been noticed by your peers. And now, with barely a moment to digest this inadequate meal, the wooden clapper sounds again. Breakfast is over. The real training is about to begin. The morning sun now fully crests the horizon as you follow the other apprentices to the main training hall. Your body, already taxed from the warm-up exercises and unsatisfied by the meager breakfast, protests each step. The wooden building before you looks deceptively simple from the outside, but you'll soon discover it's a chamber of carefully orchestrated suffering. Inside, the polished wooden floor gleams. Weapon racks line the walls, holding an intimidating array of training implements. Wooden swords of various weights, bamboo practice weapons, and in a locked cabinet that only the master can access, actual bladed weapons that will be used by the advanced students. The air smells of polished wood, sweat, and something else. Fear, perhaps, though not from the other apprentices. "Caesar," commands the master as he enters. Everyone drops immediately to their knees, sitting back on their heels in the formal kneeling position. You clumsily attempt to mimic them, but your ankles and knees, unaccustomed to this position, scream in protest. Modern human anatomy hasn't changed much in a few hundred years, but modern habits certainly have. Your tight hip flexors and weak ankle mobility from a lifetime of chair sitting make this supposedly restful position absolute torture. After what feels like an eternity, but is actually only 3 minutes, the master gives permission to stand. The other apprentices rise gracefully. You, however, find your feet have gone completely numb. You stumble awkwardly, nearly falling into the student beside you, who sidesteps with practiced ease and a barely concealed look of contempt. "Today we begin with subbery," announces the master. Each apprentice approaches the rack and selects a bokken, a wooden practice sword. With careful reverence, you follow suit, grabbing what seems like a reasonably sized one. Immediately, a senior student corrects you, taking it from your hands and replacing it with one that's significantly heavier. "This one matches your height," he explains curtly. "The weight builds proper muscles." You lift the wooden sword, surprised by its heft. Historical records indicate that training weapons were often deliberately heavier than combat weapons, a practice still used in many martial arts today. The bokken you're holding weighs nearly 3 times what an actual katana would, specifically to develop the supporting muscles needed for proper form. Everyone lines up in formation, facing the front of the dojo where the master demonstrates the first cut, a simple overhead strike called men. It looks straightforward enough. He raises the sword above his head and brings it down in a clean, straight line, stopping precisely at waist level. His movement is fluid, powerful, and somehow both forceful and effortless. "Begin!" he commands, and the room fills with the swooshing sound of 30 wooden swords cutting through air in perfect unison. Except yours, which is noticeably off rhythm and making more of a labored whopping sound. After just 5 repetitions, your shoulders burn. After 15, your grip begins to falter. By 30, your form has completely deteriorated, the sword wobbling on its descent. Meanwhile, the other students maintain perfect form, their movements crisp and precise. The master walks between the rows, making minor adjustments to stances and grips. When he reaches you, he doesn't speak, merely shakes his head slightly and moves on. You're beyond basic correction. One particularly quirky training method involves cutting in time with a mechanical metronome-like device, a water clock that drips at precise intervals. Each cut must begin and end with the drip, forcing students to develop an intuitive sense of timing that would prove crucial in actual combat. Historians have uncovered training manuals that describe how samurai viewed proper timing as almost mystical in nature, neither rushed nor delayed, but occurring in the perfect moment. After 200 repetitions of the basic cut, your arms hang uselessly at your sides, the wooden sword feeling like it weighs 100 pounds. The master calls for a brief rest, during which the senior students remain in perfect posture, while you pathetically attempt to massage feeling back into your trembling fingers. "Now we practice the 8 basic cuts," announces the master, demonstrating a complex series of diagonal, horizontal, and rising cuts. Your heart sinks. The single overhead cut was challenging enough. Now you must perform varied cutting angles that require entirely different muscle groups and body mechanics. Scholarly debate still continues about exactly how many fundamental cutting techniques existed in various samurai schools. Some historical texts suggest as few as 5, while others describe up to 20 distinct cuts that formed the foundation of swordsmanship. What historians do agree on is that these techniques were practiced tens of thousands of times until they became instinctual. Your modern brain, accustomed to novelty and quick rewards, rebels against this monotonous practice. The psychological torture of repetition without variation, of perfect practice with no shortcuts, is almost worse than the physical strain. You find yourself making the same errors repeatedly, unable to correct your form because your muscles simply lack the necessary conditioning. By mid-morning, a particularly humiliating moment occurs. During a cutting drill, your sweaty hands lose their grip on the heavy wooden sword, sending it flying across the dojo, narrowly missing another student's head before clattering against the wall. The entire room goes silent. This isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous and shows a fundamental lack of control that would be lethal in actual combat. The master's face remains impassive, but his words cut deeper than any blade could. A samurai who cannot control his weapon, cannot control his destiny. 20 extra cuts after training concludes. How? As the morning training session finally nears its end, your arms hang useless at your sides, your shoulders and back spasm with newly awakened muscle groups, and blisters have formed then burst on your palms, leaving the wooden handle of your practice sword stained with blood. The other apprentices show minimal signs of fatigue, having built up calluses both physical and mental over years of identical training. The wooden clapper sounds, signaling the end of the sword training session. You've survived, barely, but the day has just begun, and you haven't even touched an actual blade yet. Your relief at the conclusion of weapon training evaporates instantly when you learn what comes next. As the other apprentices arrange themselves in neat rows, sitting in that torturous Caesar position again, you realize it's time for meditation, zazen. Your modern brain, constantly stimulated by notifications, videos, and endless digital distractions, is about to face perhaps its greatest challenge yet: absolute stillness. The warrior who cannot master his mind cannot master his sword, intones the meditation master, an elderly samurai whose calm demeanor belies the strict discipline he's about to enforce. Today, we practice for 1 hour. 1 hour? Of just sitting? Your inner monologue laughs nervously. How hard could that be? Incredibly hard, as it turns out. Historical records show that samurai meditation practices were far more rigorous than the modern 10-minute guided meditation apps that gently suggest you return to your breath when your mind wanders. Here, mental discipline is enforced with wooden sticks and public humiliation. You arrange yourself in the position demonstrated, spine straight, hands forming a specific mudra, ritual position, eyes half open and focused on the floor about 3 feet ahead. Within 30 seconds, your back muscles, already fatigued from the morning's sword training, begin to protest. By 2 minutes, your mind is racing through an inventory of discomforts, knees aching, ankles burning, an itch on your nose that's becoming the focal point of your entire existence. Do not move, whispers the senior student beside you, without appearing to move his lips. The keisaku will come. The keisaku, you soon discover, is a flat wooden stick carried by the meditation master as he patrols the rows of seated apprentices. When he notices signs of drowsiness or distraction, a slightly slumped posture, fidgeting fingers, or even a change in breathing pattern, he stops behind the offending student. "Would you like encouragement?" he asks, though it's not really a question. The student must then bow forward, exposing the shoulders, where the master delivers 2 sharp strikes with the keisaku. Not painful enough to injure, but certainly enough to shock the system back to alertness. Your first encouragement comes at the 12-minute mark, when your posture has collapsed to what feels like a reasonable compromise, but is apparently a grievous offense to proper meditation form. The sharp crack across your shoulders startles a small yelp from you, another breach of protocol, as silence is absolute during zazen. This earns you a second round of encouragement. One particularly quirky aspect of samurai meditation that historians have documented was the practice of solving koans, paradoxical riddles that defy logical solutions, while maintaining perfect physical stillness. Your meditation master presents one. Show me your original face before your parents were born. Your tired brain immediately tries to formulate a clever answer, missing the entire point of the exercise. These riddles aren't meant to be solved intellectually, but to exhaust the logical mind into surrender. 20 minutes in, an interesting phenomenon occurs. Your physical discomfort reaches such an intensity that something shifts, a surrender of sorts. For perhaps 30 seconds, You experience what researchers studying meditation call the gap, a brief respite where the chattering mind falls silent. It's oddly pleasant, a floating sensation that hints at why someone might voluntarily subject themselves to this torture. Then your left foot erupts in pins and needles, and the moment shatters. By the halfway point, you're locked in an internal battle more demanding than any physical fight. Modern neuroscience actually confirms what samurai instructors intuited, that maintaining focused attention for extended periods physically reshapes neural pathways. The struggle you're experiencing is literally your brain being rewired against its will. Historians still debate the exact purposes of meditation in samurai training. Some scholars emphasize its practical combat benefits, developing the no-mind state, mushin, that allows for instantaneous reaction without thought. Others point to its roots in Zen Buddhism and the spiritual development of the warrior. Whatever the purpose, your experience confirms one thing: it's brutally effective at highlighting just how undisciplined your modern mind truly is. 40 minutes in, something unexpected happens. The pain doesn't diminish, but your relationship to it changes. You begin observing the sensations with a strange detachment, noting the specific quality of the burning in your knees, the tension pattern across your lower back, the subtle trembling in your thighs trying to maintain the position. Is this what they mean by mindfulness? The brief moment of insight is almost rewarding. And then the master announces the final 10 minutes will be spent in kinhin, walking meditation, and your fleeting achievement collapses as you realize you can no longer feel your feet at all. Standing is its own special humiliation. While the other apprentices rise fluidly despite having been motionless for 50 minutes, you stagger upright like a newborn deer, legs buckling as circulation painfully returns. The walking meditation, performed in a precise pattern around the room, involves steps so slow and deliberate they barely qualify as movement. Each foot must be placed with complete awareness, rolling from heel to toe in perfect sync with the breath. Your walking resembles a drunk attempting stealth, all wobbling uncertainty and overcorrection. The contrast between your lurching gait and the gliding precision of the other students would be comical if it weren't so mortifying. The mind and body are one, the master announces as the session concludes. Your troubled walking reveals your troubled thoughts. A samurai with such internal chaos would be defeated before the battle begins. As meditation finally ends, you've made a shocking discovery. The stillness demanded by samurai discipline is more punishing to your modern constitution than any physical exertion. Your body might struggle with the sword training, but it's your mind, addicted to stimulation, allergic to boredom, and untrained in sustained attention, that would ultimately disqualify you from this ancient path. The most disheartening realization. This mental training session was considered light by samurai standards. Advanced practitioners would meditate for 4 hours or more, sometimes in winter while seated outside as snow accumulated on their shoulders, or in summer surrounded by mosquitoes they were forbidden to swat. And now, as the wooden clapper sounds again, you're informed it's time to attend to your master's needs. Your brief spiritual insights evaporate as you confront your next challenge: absolute servitude. Serving your master is not a break from training. It is training. As you shuffle from the meditation hall, legs still tingling with renewed circulation, you're intercepted by an older apprentice who explains your duties with brisk efficiency. Unlike the stereotypical Hollywood portrayal of samurai as lone wolves answering to no one, historical reality placed enormous emphasis on the master-servant relationship. The bond between lord and retainer formed the backbone of samurai society. The master requires his quarters prepared for the midday meal and study session, explains the senior student. You will clean the room, arrange the cushions, prepare his writing implements, and serve tea. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact unless requested. Move quietly, breathe quietly, exist quietly. You're led to the master's private quarters, a modestly elegant space with tatami flooring, sliding paper doors, and minimalist decorations. A small alcove contains a carefully arranged flower stem and hanging scroll with calligraphy. The simplicity is deceptive. You'll soon discover that maintaining this austere perfection is a painstaking process. First, you must clean. Not modern cleaning with electric vacuums and spray bottles, but traditional cleaning that's practically a martial art in itself. You're handed a small bundle of soft cloths and directed to dust every surface following a specific pattern, high to low, north to south, east to west. The methodical approach seems excessive until you realize it ensures no spot is missed and minimizes the redistribution of dust. The tatami mats must be swept with a special brush using precise, overlapping strokes. Your awkward attempts leave visible streak marks that the senior student silently corrects, demonstrating the proper wrist motion. One particularly quirky detail: you must count your breathing while sweeping to maintain a consistent rhythm that supposedly optimizes dust collection while minimizing noise. Historians note that this attention to detail wasn't merely about cleanliness. The ritual of serving trained apprentices in awareness, precision, and the ability to anticipate needs. All skills that transfer directly to combat situations. The warrior who couldn't correctly anticipate where dust would settle could hardly be expected to predict an opponent's movements. As you struggle with these unfamiliar tasks, the fundamental clash between modern individualism and samurai subservience becomes painfully apparent. Your entire upbringing has emphasized self-actualization, personal choice, and questioning authority. Here, those values aren't just discouraged, they're actively dangerous. Historical accounts describe severe punishments for servants who showed even a hint of defiance, from physical beatings to expulsion, which often meant economic ruin or worse. Now comes the tea preparation, a deceptively complex process that makes your local barista's latte art look like finger painting. You must heat the water to precisely the right temperature, not boiling, but the moment when crab eyes form on the surface, whatever that means. The tea itself must be measured with utensils you've never seen before, whisked to a specific consistency using a bamboo whisk and precise circular motions. No, 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 sighs the senior student, taking the whisk from your hands after watching your pitiful attempts. You must whisk from the wrist, not the arm. The motion is like drawing the character for water, flowing but controlled. Your frustration mounts. How are you supposed to master these minutiae when you've barely begun? The senior student reads your expression and offers a rare explanation. These are not arbitrary rules. The master will know your character by how you prepare his tea. Rush the whisking, and he knows you lack patience. Overheat the water, and he knows you lack attention. Make it too strong, and he knows you lack balance. The tea serves you before it serves him. Scholarly debate continues about whether this exhaustive attention to proper service was primarily practical, spiritual, or social in nature. Some historians argue it was mainly about reinforcing hierarchy, while others see it as an extension of Zen principles, finding spiritual awareness through mundane activities. Whatever the purpose, your modern sensibilities find it simultaneously tedious and stressful. The final stage of preparation involves arranging the master's writing implements for his afternoon correspondence and study. Each brush, inkstone, and paper has an exact position on the writing table. aligned according to principles you can't begin to comprehend. The inkstone must be placed at a specific angle, the water dropper positioned precisely, the brushes arranged by size and type. When the master finally enters, you must bow deeply and retreat to a position near the door, kneeling in that painful seiza again, ready to attend to any need but essentially trying to disappear. This contradicts everything your social media influenced brain understands about human interaction. Where's the greeting, the small talk, the acknowledgement of your existence? As the master settles at his table and begins writing, you remain motionless, trying not to fidget despite the renewed fire in your knees. 10 minutes pass, 20. He hasn't acknowledged you once, but you dare not relax your posture or attention. Historical accounts suggest servants sometimes maintained these waiting positions for hours, ready to respond instantly when needed. Finally, he speaks, not to you, but to the senior student who has been supervising your work. The new apprentice prepared the tea. Yes, master. He sips thoughtfully, then places the cup down with the slightest grimace. Too much leaf, whisked too aggressively. The spirit is evident in the result. That's it. Your entire evaluation reduced to the flavor profile of a beverage. Yet in this simple assessment, he has judged your character, your potential, your mindset, and found them wanting. The worst part, he's right. You did rush the whisking, frustrated by the unfamiliar tool. You did overestimate the leaf amount, assuming stronger was better. Your modern impatience, your need for immediate results, your resistance to methodical precision, all perfectly exposed in a cup of tea. As you continue kneeling there, invisible until needed, a fundamental truth about samurai apprenticeship becomes clear. It's not just that you lack the physical conditioning or specific skills, you lack the entire mental framework that makes this life comprehensible. Your individualistic, efficiency-focused, recognition-seeking modern mindset is not just unprepared for samurai service, it's actively opposed to its foundational principles. The master speaks again, this time directly to you, without turning. When you understand that perfect service requires forgetting yourself entirely, you will begin to learn, not before. You remain kneeling as the midday bell sounds, marking the transition to the next brutal phase of training. Your knees scream, your back aches, your ego smarts, and you've yet to reach the halfway point of this impossible day. The midday sun beats down mercilessly as you're released from your service duties and directed toward the outer training grounds. The summer heat in feudal Japan is no gentle warmth. It's a stifling, humid assault that immediately plasters your cotton training clothes to your skin. Without modern conveniences like air conditioning, deodorant, or even ice, you're about to experience environmental hardship that would make most contemporary humans surrender on the spot. Heat training builds fortitude, explains the supervising senior student, who appears completely unaffected by the temperature that has you already gasping. A warrior who cannot function in discomfort cannot function in battle. Historical records confirm that samurai deliberately trained in extreme weather conditions precisely to develop this resilience. Winter training involved standing barefoot in snow or practicing sword cuts in freezing rain. Summer exercises were conducted in the most punishing midday heat, when most sensible people would be seeking shade. Your first midday challenge involves carrying buckets of water from the nearby river to fill the dojo's storage barrels, a distance of about a quarter mile each way. The wooden buckets, hanging from a shoulder pole, weigh approximately 40 pounds each when full. Modern exercise science would classify this as a functional full-body workout, combining cardiovascular conditioning with strength training. You classify it as torture. By the third trip, your shoulders are rubbed raw from the wooden pole, your hands blistered from the rope handles, and your cotton uniform completely soaked through with sweat. The supervising student walks alongside, occasionally commenting on your deteriorating form and reminding you to maintain proper breathing, as if breathing itself weren't challenging enough in this heat. One particularly quirky aspect of this water-carrying training involves strict rules about spillage. For every drop of water spilled during transport, you're required to make an additional trip. Your first attempt results in nearly half the water sloshing over the sides due to your unbalanced gait, earning you 3 penalty trips. The senior students, by contrast, move with such fluid efficiency that the water surface barely ripples despite their brisk pace. Modern heat safety guidelines would absolutely prohibit this kind of exertion in these temperatures. Heat exhaustion and heat stroke are serious risks that contemporary athletic trainers actively prevent. Here, they seem to be the point. Historians have uncovered training manuals that specifically instruct masters to push students to the edge of physical collapse in order to develop what was called perseverance power, tairyoku. By your 6th water trip, including penalties, your vision begins to blur slightly at the edges, an early warning sign of heat exhaustion that no one here seems concerned about. Your pace has slowed to a pained shuffle, but requests for water are met with stern refusal. You carry water, you do not drink it until the work is complete, states the supervising student flatly. Control your thirst as you would control fear. The logic seems brutally counterproductive to your modern understanding of hydration and performance, but it reflects a fundamental philosophical difference. Samurai training wasn't designed to optimize physical performance as we understand it today. It was designed to develop spiritual qualities through physical suffering. Scholars still debate whether this approach was motivated more by practical battlefield considerations or by religious concepts of purification through hardship. After completing your water duties, you're granted a brief rest in the shade, though rest means kneeling in Caesar, not the collapsed heap your body desperately desires. A small cup of barley tea is your only refreshment, tepid and bitter, but currently the most delicious thing you've ever tasted. Your hands shake as you lift it to your lips. The brief respite ends all too quickly as you're summoned for the next challenge. Garden maintenance. The dojo grounds include extensive gardens that require constant attention, and this too is considered part of training rather than mere chores. You're handed primitive tools, a bamboo rake, a pair of shears that look better suited for torturing prisoners than trimming plants, and a woven basket. Each stone must be free of debris, instructs the gardening master, an elderly samurai whose weathered hands suggest decades of such work. Each branch must be cut at the correct angle. Each path must be raked in the pattern I demonstrate. No more, no less. What follows is 3 hours of painstaking labor under the blistering sun. Modern landscapers with power tools and leaf blowers would struggle to meet the exacting standards demanded here. You, with your inadequate tools and depleted energy reserves, have no chance. The garden maintenance isn't just physically demanding, it's mentally exhausting in its precision requirements. The stone garden proves particularly maddening. Each pebble must be arranged according to a pattern that represents flowing water, an aesthetic concept called karasan sui that requires both artistic sensibility and methodical patience. Your clumsy attempts to recreate the master's demonstration result in what looks more like the aftermath of a landslide than a contemplative landscape. No, no, sighs the garden master for the 10th time. The stones are not randomly placed. They represent mountains emerging from mist. The rake patterns suggest ripples on water that isn't there. The empty space is as important as what fills it. This concept of MR, the significance of negative space, is fundamental to Japanese aesthetics, but completely foreign to your Western, content-focused mindset. The heat intensifies as afternoon progresses. Sweat drips into your eyes, mosquitoes feast on every exposed inch of skin, and your back screams from the constant bending. Yet the elderly garden master works alongside you, displaying no discomfort despite his advanced age. His hands move with practiced economy, achieving perfect results with half the effort you're expending. In the garden, as in combat, unnecessary movement is wasted energy, he observes, watching your inefficient struggling. You fight against the task rather than flowing with it. The most humiliating moment comes when you're asked to trim a precise line of hedge. Despite your best efforts, the result is embarrassingly lopsided. The garden master silently takes the shears from your hands, retrims the entire section in a few efficient snips, and returns the tools without comment. The message is clear. Your best effort isn't merely inadequate. It's actively detrimental to the harmony of the space. As the punishing garden training finally concludes, you're lightheaded from heat and exertion. Your hands are cramped into claw-like positions around phantom tool handles. Your fair skin, unprotected by modern sunscreen, has turned an angry red that promises significant pain by evening. The water bucket you so laboriously carried earlier is now used to sluice away the sweat and grime from your face and hands. No full bathing yet, and you're directed back toward the main building. Your steps are unsteady, your breathing labored. The heat purifies, says the senior student, noting your distress without sympathy. Your weakness is being burned away. Be grateful. Grateful is the last thing you feel as you stagger back toward your next trial. The taste of salt heavy on your lips. Your modern body clearly communicating that it was never designed for this level of environmental stress. And somehow, despite the brutal physical demands of the day thus far, your next challenge will test an entirely different kind of endurance, one that your screen-addicted brain is even less prepared to face. The contrast between the punishing outdoor heat and the cool interior of the calligraphy hall provides momentary relief as you enter. This reprieve is short-lived, however, as you discover that the mental demands of the next phase of training are every bit as brutal as the physical challenges you've endured thus far. The calligraphy master, a thin, elegant man with impeccable posture, gestures for you to take a seat at one of the low writing desks arranged in neat rows. Unlike the martial training hall, this room has an atmosphere of hushed intensity. Scrolls displaying masterful brushwork hang on the walls, and the faint scent of ink permeates the air. The sword and the brush are two sides of the same coin, the master begins, his voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow filling the room. A samurai who cannot master the brush cannot truly master the blade. This wasn't mere philosophy. Historical records confirm that literacy and artistic accomplishment were essential components of samurai education from the Kamakura period onward. Far from the one-dimensional warriors often portrayed in popular media, samurai were expected to be cultured, educated, and artistically refined. Some historians argue this cultural training was as important to a samurai's identity as martial prowess, particularly during peaceful periods when administrative duties often outweighed combat requirements. As writing materials are distributed, your confidence briefly rises. Unlike the physical tasks that have exposed your inadequate conditioning, surely your modern education gives you some advantage here. This delusion evaporates the moment the master demonstrates the first exercise, drawing a perfect horizontal line with a single brush stroke. The brush itself is nothing like the writing implements you're familiar with. Made from animal hair bound to a bamboo handle, it requires a completely different grip and technique than pens or pencils. You must hold it vertically, your arm suspended rather than resting on the table, and the movement comes from the shoulder rather than the fingers or wrist. Your first attempt at the horizontal line looks like the cardiogram of someone having a seizure, wobbly, uneven, and with globs of excess ink where you hesitated. The master silently places your practice sheet aside and demonstrates again, producing a line of such perfect weight and evenness it seems impossible it came from a human hand. The line contains the universe, he says cryptically. Perfect balance, perfect control, perfect intention. Try again. By your fifth attempt, your arm is trembling from the unaccustomed position, and your lines have improved from seizure victim to merely seriously intoxicated. Meanwhile, the other apprentices produce work that, while not matching the master's perfection, at least appears to have been created by functioning humans rather than spasming squirrels. After an hour of practice lines, horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, the master introduces the next challenge: actual characters. You're to copy a simple poem written in kanji, characters derived from Chinese that can require up to 20 separate brushstrokes each. One particularly quirky aspect of Japanese calligraphy that historians have documented is the concept of bone, flesh, and skin. The idea that characters have an internal structure, bone, that supports the visible brushwork, flesh, and is unified by an overall aesthetic harmony, skin. For you, just remembering the correct stroke order is challenge enough. Each character must be constructed in a specific sequence, top to bottom, left to right, with exceptions that seem completely arbitrary to your untrained eye. Make a mistake, and you must start the entire character again. There's no erasing in traditional calligraphy. Your modern brain, conditioned by autocorrect and the backspace key, finds this permanence excruciating. The psychological strain of knowing each movement is irrevocable creates a tension that makes your hand shake even more, creating a vicious cycle of anxiety and poor performance. You think too much, observes the master, watching you hesitate before each stroke. The character must flow from spirit, not mind. You are trying to construct it like building blocks, but it must grow like a living thing. This concept of mushin, no mind, appears repeatedly in samurai arts. The idea that perfect action emerges when conscious thought steps aside runs counter to your analytical, step-by-step modern approach to learning. Scholarly debate continues about whether this state represents a neurological condition similar to what modern sports psychology calls flow state, or something more metaphysical, related to Zen Buddhist concepts of non-self. After calligraphy comes poetry composition, another essential samurai accomplishment. You're asked to compose a haiku on the theme of summer heat, a task that seems straightforward until you learn the complex rules governing this deceptively simple form. Not only must you follow the 5-7-5 syllable pattern, but your poem must contain a seasonal reference, kigo, and a cutting word, kireiji, that creates a specific emotional effect. A warrior's heart is revealed in his poetry, the master explains. The same precision that guides your sword must guide your words. Your composition attempt is pitiful, a painfully obvious observation about sweat and sun that the master dismisses with a slight frown. He reads aloud a student poem from the previous year that somehow captures the essence of summer heat through an image of a single dewdrop on a blade of grass. The comparison does nothing for your already battered self-esteem. The final artistic challenge involves drawing, not realistic representation, but the suggestive, minimalist style favored in Japanese ink painting, sumi-e. The subject is a simple bamboo stalk, which the master demonstrates with 3 confident brushstrokes that somehow perfectly capture the essence of bamboo without depicting every leaf and joint. Your attempt looks less like bamboo and more like someone used the brush to swat a mosquito. The master studies it with the same expression one might give to something unpleasant found stuck to the bottom of a sandal. Art reveals character, he says simply. Your brush shows impatience, doubt, and attachment to outcome rather than process. The same flaws will manifest in your swordsmanship. By the end of the art training session, your frustration has reached new heights. The precision, patience, and aesthetic sensitivity required seem as physically impossible for you as lifting a boulder with one finger. Your modern education, which prioritized content over form and results over process, has left you woefully unprepared for an art tradition where how you create is inseparable from what you create. As the session concludes, you notice your shoulders and neck are knotted with tension, despite the relative physical ease of the tasks. The mental strain of sustained concentration and perfectionist standards has created a different kind of exhaustion, one that your Instagram scrolling brain finds particularly torturous. The wooden clapper sounds again, signaling the transition to the next phase of training. As you rise stiffly from the writing desk, the calligraphy master offers a rare word of encouragement. The worst calligraphy student I ever taught eventually became quite competent. It only took him 8 years of daily practice. With that dubious comfort, you shuffle toward your next challenge, arms aching from maintaining brush positions, mind frazzled from concentrated effort, and spirit dampened by the revelation that even the artistic aspects of samurai training are forms of elaborate, exacting torture. The archery range sits adjacent to the main training compound, an open-air gallery with targets arranged at various distances. As you approach, the distinctive thwack of arrows finding their mark grows louder. Unlike the Western concept of archery with its compound bows and mechanical releases, Kyudo, the Japanese way of the bow, is as much spiritual discipline as martial skill. The Kyudo master is the oldest instructor you've encountered yet, a weathered man with hands gnarled from decades of drawing the enormous asymmetrical bow. He regards you with keen eyes that miss nothing and seem to look through you rather than at you. Archery is not about hitting the target, he begins, immediately contradicting everything you thought you understood about the sport. Archery is about revealing the truth of your character in the moment of release. Historical records confirm that Japanese archery evolved from a purely martial discipline into a spiritual practice, heavily influenced by Zen Buddhism. By the Edo period, many Kyudo schools emphasized the ceremonial and meditative aspects as much as practical marksmanship. Some historians still debate whether this shift represented a practical adaptation to the peaceful Tokugawa era, or a genuine philosophical evolution of the art. The Kyudo equipment itself presents your first obstacle. The traditional Japanese bow, yumi, is absurdly tall, nearly 7.5 feet in length, and asymmetrically designed, with the grip positioned a third of the way from the bottom rather than at the center. Made from laminated bamboo and wood, it requires a drawing strength far beyond what your untrained arms can manage after the day's earlier exertions. First, we practice the form without the bow, instructs the master, demonstrating the complex ritual of Kyudo shooting, which involves 8 distinct stages executed with ceremonial precision. Modern target archery focuses almost exclusively on accuracy. Kyudo demands that every movement, from your initial stance to the final lowering of the bow, embodies specific philosophical principles. The first position, ashibumi, footing, requires you to stand with your feet precisely positioned at a specific angle and distance apart. This sounds simple until the master corrects your stance 6 times in succession, making adjustments of less than an inch that somehow transform the entire alignment of your body. The foundation must be perfect, he explains. From unstable roots, nothing true can grow. One particularly quirky aspect of Kyudo training involves a practice method called sunai-tori, literally sand-gathering form, where apprentices must perform the shooting ritual while standing on a narrow wooden beam. Any wobble or imbalance results in immediate failure and repetition. This practice, documented in historical training manuals, developed the archer's center of gravity and stability, critical factors when shooting from horseback or difficult terrain during actual combat. By the time you reach the 4th position, dozukuri, forming the torso, your body is already trembling from trying to maintain the precise alignment of the previous positions. The master observes your struggle with detached interest. Your modern posture betrays you, he notes. The hours you spend hunched over screens have weakened your back and tightened your chest. Your body has forgotten its natural alignment. He's not wrong. Modern postural research confirms that contemporary lifestyle habits have dramatically altered human biomechanics compared to our ancestors. The upright, balanced posture that comes naturally to the other apprentices requires conscious effort and significant discomfort for you to approximate. After an hour of practicing the forms without a bow, an eternity of minute adjustments and holding uncomfortable positions, you're finally permitted to hold the practice bow. Not to shoot, mind you, just to incorporate the massive weapon into the ritual movements you've been struggling to master. The weight and awkward dimensions of the yumi immediately throw off the form you've been laboring to achieve. As you attempt to raise it into position, the bow wobbles dangerously, nearly striking another student and earning you a sharp rebuke from the master. The bow is an extension of your spirit, he says severely. Your unstable mind creates an unstable bow. After another hour of practice with the unstrung bow, your arms are shaking uncontrollably and sweat drips from your chin despite the relative shade of the archery range. The other students maintain their forms with stoic determination, though you notice even they show signs of fatigue, a testament to how physically demanding these supposedly ceremonial movements actually are. Finally, the master announces you will attempt actual shooting. Not you personally, you soon discover with a mixture of relief and disappointment, but the class as a whole, with only the senior students permitted to loose arrows while beginners observe. The full shooting ritual is mesmerizing to watch. Each archer approaches the shooting line with ceremonial steps, nocks an arrow with deliberate movements, and draws the massive bow in a slow, controlled motion that brings the drawing hand behind the ear rather than to the cheek, as in Western archery. At full draw, they hold the position, an incredible feat of strength given the power of these bows, and then release with an explosive breath. Most fascinating is what happens after the arrow is loosed. The bow spins forward in the archer's hand, completing a full rotation controlled only by a small cord around the wrist. This after action, you learn, is considered as important as the shot itself, revealing whether the archer's spirit was truly committed to the release. The target is only a vehicle for understanding yourself, the master explains as you watch. A perfect shot from a clouded mind is a failure. A missed target from perfect spirit is success. This concept seems utterly backward to your results-oriented modern thinking. The idea that process could matter more than outcome contradicts everything your achievement-focused education has instilled in you. Scholarly debate continues about whether this philosophy represented a genuine spiritual approach or a clever psychological training method to develop the unattached mental state beneficial in actual combat. When you're finally permitted to attempt a shot, using a bow of reduced draw weight that still feels like trying to bend a car's suspension spring, the results are predictably disastrous. Your form collapses under the strain of the draw, your release is jerky and premature, and your arrow sails well wide of the target, embedding itself in the dirt backstop. The master observes your attempt without comment, but his slight headshake communicates volumes. The other students maintain carefully neutral expressions, though you detect traces of amusement in some eyes. Your second attempt is marginally better. The arrow at least flies in the general direction of the target, but the bow's spin nearly dislocates your wrist as you fail to control the powerful follow-through motion. Your body fights against itself, the master finally observes. Your muscles strain against each other, rather than working in harmony. You try to dominate the bow instead of becoming one with it. By your fifth attempt, your fingers are raw from the bowstring. Your drawing shoulder feels partially dislocated, and you've managed to graze the outer ring of the target exactly once. An achievement that feels monumental given your struggles, but earns no acknowledgement from the impassive master. As the archery session concludes, you've gained newfound respect for the physical demands of this supposedly ceremonial art. Modern sports science confirms that Kyudo engages virtually every major muscle group and requires extraordinary proprioception and body awareness. What looks like graceful ritual to observers is, in fact, an intensely demanding physical discipline disguised as spiritual ceremony. The master offers a final observation as you prepare to leave. In the West, you believe mastery means controlling the outcome. In Kyudo, mastery means perfecting the self so completely that the outcome becomes irrelevant. With these cryptic words echoing in your mind, you depart the archery range, your body now complaining from fingertips to toes, each muscle group finding new ways to express its suffering. And still, the most physically demanding portion of your day as a samurai apprentice lies ahead. Combat training with actual bladed weapons. The late afternoon brings you to what modern martial arts practitioners would recognize as sparring practice, except the stakes here are exponentially higher. As you enter the combat training field, your heart sinks at the sight of actual steel weapons being distributed to the senior students. This is no longer practice with wooden swords. This is combat training with blades capable of severing limbs. Live steel teaches respect that wood cannot, explains the combat master, a barrel-chested man with a face marked by old scars that testify to the lessons he's about to impart. Fear sharpens awareness. Pain teaches quickly what words cannot. Historical records confirm that samurai training did indeed include practice with sharpened weapons, though the extent and methods varied by era and school. During periods of active warfare, practical combat skills naturally took precedence over ceremonial forms. Some historians argue that the relatively peaceful Edo period saw a shift towards safer training methods, while others have documented that certain traditional schools maintained the practice of blood sparring well into the modern era. You're paired with a senior student who looks at you with the resigned expression of someone who drew the short straw. As a beginner, you're given a dulled practice blade rather than a fully sharpened weapon. Small comfort, given that even a blunt sword can break bones when wielded with sufficient force. We begin with controlled exchanges, the combat master announces. Attack and counter, 5 repetitions each, then switch roles. Your partner demonstrates the first attack, a simple overhead cut aimed at your left shoulder. You're to block it with your sword held horizontally, then step back to create distance. The movement looks straightforward in demonstration. When it's time to execute, however, the reality of facing an actual blade, even a dulled one, triggers your body's primal survival responses. As your partner's sword descends towards you, your carefully taught blocking technique dissolves into pure instinct. You flinch backward, raising your sword awkwardly and closing your eyes, a combination guaranteed to end in disaster if this were actual combat. The practice blade stops a hair's breadth from your shoulder. Your partner sighs audibly. "Again," he says tersely. "Keep your eyes open. The sword you don't see is the one that kills you." Your second attempt is marginally better, though your block lacks proper angle and structure. The impact of metal against metal sends painful vibrations through your already fatigued arms, causing you to drop your guard immediately after the block. Another potentially fatal error in real combat. "Maintain Zanshin," calls the combat master, observing your mistake from across the field. Awareness continues after the exchange. The battle is not over until you are back home, telling stories to your grandchildren. This concept of Zanshin, continued awareness and readiness after an action, represents a fundamental principle of samurai combat training. One particularly quirky training method for developing this quality involved apprentices being struck with a bamboo stick at random moments throughout the day, especially after completing other tasks when their guard might naturally lower. Historical documents describe senior students hiding around corners or behind doors, waiting to ambush juniors who failed to maintain proper awareness. By your fifth repetition as defender, you've managed to execute a passable block, though your technique remains rigid and your reactions delayed. Now comes the truly terrifying part, your turn to attack. Swinging a sword at another human being, even in controlled practice, violates every social taboo your modern upbringing has instilled. Your first attack is hesitant and weak, barely requiring any effort from your partner to block. "Commit fully," instructs your partner. Hesitation gets you killed. In real combat, each cut must be executed as if it is the only cut you will ever make. You try again, putting more force behind the strike, but still pulling back slightly at the moment of impact. Your partner blocks easily, then demonstrates by launching a counterattack that stops just short of your ribs, a sobering reminder of the openings your half-hearted attack creates. Scholarly debate continues about the psychological training methods used to overcome this natural hesitation. Some historical texts suggest that samurai apprentices were sometimes required to practice cutting techniques on the corpses of executed criminals, while others describe systematic desensitization through increasingly realistic training scenarios. Whatever the method, the goal was to develop what modern military training calls stress inoculation, the ability to function effectively despite the body's natural aversion to violence. After the basic exchanges come free sparring matches, though as a beginner, you're relegated to observing rather than participating. The display is both beautiful and terrifying. Senior students moving with fluid precision, their blades catching the late afternoon sun as they execute complex combinations of attacks, parries, and counterstrikes. What strikes you most is the control they exhibit. Despite the speed and power of their movements, injuries appear rare and minor, a testament to years of systematic training that has honed their awareness and precision to superhuman levels. Modern neuroscience has actually confirmed what samurai instructors intuited centuries ago, that with sufficient repetition, complex motor patterns can become embedded in procedural memory, allowing for execution without conscious thought, what we now call muscle memory. Notice how they create openings, the combat master instructs as you watch. The sword is not just a weapon, but a tool of manipulation. The true target is not the opponent's body, but their mind. This psychological aspect of combat, using movements to create false openings, disguise true intentions, and manipulate an opponent's responses, represents a level of complexity you hadn't considered. Modern sports psychology recognizes this as competitive mind gaming, but feudal Japanese martial arts developed these concepts to their highest form centuries ago. Near the end of the sparring session, you're called back to participate in a final exercise, one that proves the most humiliating yet. Each apprentice must walk through a gauntlet of senior students who attack from unexpected angles. Your task is simply to avoid being hit. Your first attempt is a disaster. Focusing too much on the student directly ahead, you fail to notice the attack coming from your left until the practice blade raps painfully against your ribs. Your second pass ends with a strike to your back as you overcompensate for the previous error. By your third attempt, welts are rising on various parts of your body, each one marking a potential fatal wound had these been real combat conditions. Your awareness is fragmented, observes the combat master. You see only what you are looking at, not what surrounds you. A samurai must feel the battlefield with his entire being. This concept of omnidirectional awareness, perceiving threats from all angles simultaneously, seems physically impossible to your modern sensibilities. Yet the senior students navigate the gauntlet with minimal hits, somehow sensing attacks before they fully develop and adjusting their position accordingly. One particularly fascinating aspect of traditional combat training involved developing peripheral vision through specific exercises. Historical documents describe practices like maintaining focus on a distant point while identifying objects moved into the edges of the visual field. Modern sports vision training uses similar techniques, confirming the effectiveness of methods developed centuries ago through trial and error. As the combat session finally concludes, your body is marked with bruises and welts, your arms shake uncontrollably from exertion, and your mind reels from the overwhelming sensory input. The wooden practice sword you started with now feels as heavy as a real blade in your exhausted hands. The combat master offers a final assessment as you prepare to leave. In one day, you have experienced what takes most apprentices a week to process. Remember this: the difference between mastery and mediocrity is not talent, but endurance. Those who cannot bear today's training will never see tomorrow's improvement. With these words echoing in your battered consciousness, you stumble toward your next challenge, philosophical instruction that will test your mind as thoroughly as the day's physical training has tested your body. And somehow, despite your exhaustion, you must find the mental clarity to engage with concepts entirely foreign to your modern worldview. As dusk approaches, you're led to a small building separate from the main compound, the domain of the philosophy master. This elderly man, with a shaved head and simple robe that suggests monastic affiliations, sits calmly on a raised platform. Despite the humble surroundings, there's something intimidating about his stillness, a quality of presence that makes the air feel somehow denser around him. The samurai who understands only the sword understands nothing. He begins without preamble as you and the other apprentices settle into the familiar torture of Seiza before him. Today, we explore the 5 rings of knowledge that bind the warrior's path. The reference is to Miyamoto Musashi's classic Book of 5 Rings, one of several philosophical texts that form the intellectual foundation of samurai education. Historical records confirm that philosophical training was considered essential to warrior development, particularly during the Edo period, when administrative duties often occupied more of a samurai's time than actual combat. The stereotype of the mindless warrior, focused solely on fighting techniques, completely misrepresents the sophisticated intellectual tradition that underlay samurai culture. Your legs are already screaming from the day's accumulated abuse, and maintaining proper sitting posture while focusing on abstract philosophical concepts creates a unique form of suffering. The physical discomfort is deliberate, you realize. Another test of your ability to transcend bodily limitations and maintain mental clarity despite distraction. We begin with Mushin, the concept of no mind. The philosophy master continues. When the mind clings to thought, it becomes rigid. When it attaches to outcome, it becomes blind. When it dwells on self, it becomes weak. The empty mind, like a clear mirror, reflects reality perfectly without distortion. This concept of no mind, a mental state beyond thought, beyond emotion, beyond ego, represents your first major philosophical challenge. Your modern consciousness, shaped by Western intellectual traditions emphasizing rational analysis and individual identity, recoils from the very premise. The idea of emptying rather than filling the mind, of transcending rather than strengthening the self, contradicts everything your education has valued. "Master," ventures one brave student, "how can the mind be both empty and aware? Doesn't awareness require thought?" The philosopher's response comes not as an explanation, but as a demonstration. In a movement almost too quick to follow, he produces a small wooden marker and flicks it toward the questioning student. Without apparent thought, the student's hand rises and catches it, a purely reflexive action. "Did you think about catching?" asks the master. "No, I just caught it." That is Mushin. The hand knew what to do without consulting the thinking mind. True mastery exists beyond thought. One particularly quirky aspect of samurai philosophical training involved paradoxical statements or questions called koans, verbal puzzles designed to short-circuit logical thinking and force intuitive understanding. Historical documents describe students spending years contemplating questions like, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" or "Show me your original face before your parents were born." Modern neuroscience has actually identified how these puzzles activate different brain regions than those used for analytical problem solving, potentially opening neural pathways to non-conceptual awareness. The philosophy master presents such a puzzle now. If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Or the statement leaves you utterly baffled, while the senior students nod thoughtfully as if he's just explained that water is wet. Consider this teaching until our next meeting, he continues, clearly not intending to elaborate. Now we examine the concept of giri, obligation, and its relationship to ninjo, human feeling. This next philosophical exploration proves equally challenging. The master describes a complex web of social obligations that govern every aspect of samurai life: loyalty to one's lord, responsibility to one's family, duty to one's community, and commitment to one's personal honor. These obligations frequently conflict with natural human emotions, creating the central tension of samurai existence. The untrained man follows his feelings and ignores his obligations. The partially trained man suppresses his feelings to fulfill his obligations. The fully trained samurai transforms his feelings until they align perfectly with his obligations. Scholars still debate the psychological impact of this rigorous suppression of individual desire in favor of social obligation. Some historians argue it created a culture of profound psychological repression, while others suggest it offered a sophisticated framework for transcending ego-based desires. Whatever the interpretation, this subordination of personal will to collective need represents a value system almost diametrically opposed to modern Western individualism. Your head is beginning to throb from the effort of following these abstract concepts in your fatigue-addled state. The philosophy master notes your struggle with the same detached interest he might show a particularly slow-growing plant. The body's discomfort reveals the mind's attachments, he observes. When you identify with pain, you become pain. When you observe pain without attachment, it remains merely a sensation, neither good nor bad. This stoic approach to physical suffering has modern parallels in certain psychological pain management techniques, but the samurai philosophical tradition took it much further. Historical accounts describe warriors meditating in freezing waterfalls, sitting unmoved as mosquitoes feasted on their blood, or maintaining meditation postures for days with minimal food or water. These practices weren't viewed as mere endurance tests, but as direct methods for transcending the identification with bodily experience. The next philosophical concept proves even more challenging: the proper relationship to death. The master's voice remains conversational as he discusses what modern sensibilities would consider morbid or disturbing. The samurai lives at all times with death as his companion, he explains, not in fear of death, nor in desire for death, but in intimate acceptance of its inevitability. Each morning, the samurai meditates on the various ways he might die that day. Each evening, he thanks the universe for the gift of another day completed. This practice, daily visualization of one's own death, was formalized in the samurai code as dying before going into battle. Psychological research has produced contradictory findings about the effects of such practices. Some studies suggest that contemplating mortality increases anxiety and defensive behavior, while others indicate it can produce profound shifts in values and priorities. Death is not the warrior's enemy, but his most honest teacher, continues the master. The man who has fully accepted his death is free to live completely. You struggle to relate to this perspective. Your modern relationship with death is one of denial and distance. Medical technologies push it further away. Cultural taboos keep it out of everyday conversation, and digital distractions help you ignore its inevitability. The samurai approach of looking directly at death, of using its certainty as a clarifying force rather than a fearful spectre, represents a psychological framework entirely foreign to your experience. As the philosophy session progresses, your mental fatigue matches your physical exhaustion. The concepts being presented don't just challenge your understanding, they challenge the very structure of your thinking. Modern educational approaches emphasize critical analysis, breaking complex ideas into component parts for examination. The samurai philosophical tradition instead emphasizes synthetic understanding, seeing seemingly contradictory elements as parts of a unified whole. The mind that divides cannot know truth, the master states, seemingly reading your fragmented thoughts. The sword that cuts and the hand that heals are not opposites, but expressions of the same principle. Life and death, strength and gentleness, victory and defeat, all apparent dualities dissolve in true understanding. By the end of the philosophy session, your brain feels as thoroughly pummeled as your body. You've been exposed to concepts that would require years of study to properly understand, much less integrate. And yet, in the samurai educational tradition, these philosophical principles weren't treated as abstract theories, but as practical guidelines for daily living. As twilight deepens outside the small building, the master concludes with a statement that epitomizes the challenge of samurai philosophy for your modern mind. The ultimate goal is not to know the way, but to become the way, not to understand these principles, but to embody them so completely that no gap exists between knowledge and action. With these words echoing in your overwhelmed consciousness, you're dismissed from the philosophy session and directed toward the bathing area. Your next challenge involves navigating yet another aspect of samurai life laden with complex protocols and hidden meanings, the seemingly simple act of getting clean. The bathhouse sits a short distance from the main compound, a low wooden structure with steam rising from its slated roof into the darkening sky. After the philosophical mind-bending you've just endured, the prospect of hot water and cleansing seems like blessed relief. This delusion, like so many others today, is about to be shattered against the rock of samurai reality. Bathing is not merely for cleanliness, explains the senior student escorting you to the facility. It is a ritual of purification, a social obligation, and another opportunity to demonstrate proper understanding of rank and protocol. Historical records confirm that bathing practices in feudal Japan were highly ritualized, particularly in warrior households where hierarchy governed every interaction. Far from the relaxing spa experience modern people associate with Japanese baths, samurai bathing involved strict etiquette that reflected and reinforced the social order. Some historical accounts even describe bath attendants keeping detailed notes on which samurai exhibited proper decorum and which showed potential character flaws through their bathing behavior. As you approach the changing area, your first test involves understanding where to place your clothing. Racks are arranged according to rank, with the highest positions reserved for senior members. After watching others, you gingerly place your sweat-soaked training clothes on one of the lowest shelves, appropriate to your status, but another reminder of your position in this rigid hierarchy. First, the cleaning area, directs the senior student, pointing to a row of small wooden stools and buckets positioned before taps of cold water. You must wash completely before entering the communal bath. Any dirt brought into the soaking pool is a sign of disrespect to all who use it after you. This two-step process, washing thoroughly before soaking, remains a fundamental aspect of Japanese bathing culture to this day. One particularly quirky historical detail that scholars have documented is that samurai were expected to use a specific number of water buckets for rinsing based on their rank. Higher-ranking warriors were allotted more water, a practical reflection of status in a society where heated water required significant labor to produce. You perch awkwardly on the small stool, your exhausted muscles protesting as you crouch to bathe. The cold water is shocking against your overheated skin, and the hemp cloth provided for washing feels more like sandpaper than a washcloth against your tender sunburned areas. The soap, a harsh alkaline substance nothing like your gentle pH-balanced body wash at home, makes your eyes sting and leaves your skin feeling stripped. Bathing in full view of others presents another cultural challenge. Your modern sensibilities around privacy and body image clash violently with the matter-of-fact communal nudity practiced here. The other apprentices show no self-consciousness as they efficiently wash, seemingly oblivious to their exposed state. Their bodies, you can't help noticing, bear the evidence of years of training, defined muscles, old scars, and a general physical confidence entirely absent in your own awkward movements. "Hurry up," hisses the senior student supervising the bathing process. "You waste water with your slow scrubbing. Efficiency in all things is the samurai way." After a rushed but thorough washing, you're finally directed toward the main attraction, the large communal soaking tub filled with steaming water. Here again, protocol dictates your actions. The most senior members already occupy the prime positions, the spots furthest from the door where the water is hottest and freshest. You must wait your turn and then enter from the lowest position, careful not to splash or disturb the water unnecessarily. The heat is shocking, far hotter than any bath you've experienced before. Historical records indicate that samurai baths were typically maintained at temperatures between 42–46 degrees, 108–115 degrees Celsius, hot enough to cause lightheadedness in the unprepared. Modern hot tubs are usually set around 38 and 40 degrees Celsius, 100–104 degrees Celsius, for safety reasons. Breathe through it, advises a slightly more friendly apprentice, noting your discomfort. The heat purifies both body and spirit. As your body gradually adjusts to the temperature, the initial pain gives way to a profound relaxation that borders on delirium. Your muscle aches begin to subside, replaced by a floating sensation that makes maintaining proper posture increasingly difficult. This is exactly when the social element of bathing begins. So, new one, addresses a senior student from across the bath. What did you learn in philosophy today? This seemingly casual question is actually another test. Bathing time served as an important opportunity for samurai to demonstrate their intellectual comprehension and philosophical understanding. Scholars have documented how these bath time discussions functioned as informal examinations where senior students evaluated juniors' progress and reported deficiencies to masters. Your exhausted brain scrambles to articulate something intelligent about the concepts of mushin and giri that won't reveal the depth of your confusion. Your response is halting and obviously superficial, earning subtle headshakes from the senior students. The concepts are not separate, but facets of the same jewel, corrects one older apprentice. When true no-mind is achieved, obligations are fulfilled without effort or resistance. The division you perceive between them exists only in untrained thinking. The conversation continues in this vein, seemingly casual, but laden with opportunities to display knowledge or expose ignorance. Topics range from practical sword techniques to obscure philosophical concepts to administrative matters of the dojo. Some historical accounts suggest these bath discussions were deliberately designed to occur when apprentices were at their most physically vulnerable and mentally fatigued, as this state was believed to reveal true understanding rather than memorized responses. One particularly fascinating tradition documented in historical records involves a practice called hadaka no tsukiyai, literally naked association, the idea that true character emerges when all external trappings of rank are removed. In theory, the bath creates an equalizing environment where ideas can be exchanged more freely. In practice, you quickly discover the physical absence of rank markers only heightens awareness of the invisible hierarchies that govern every interaction. After approximately 20 minutes in the scorching water, by which point your skin has turned an alarming shade of red and your head spins slightly, you're instructed to exit the bath. The next challenge involves cooling down properly, another process with specific protocols that you struggle to follow in your heat-addled state. Too quick, admonishes the supervising student as you attempt to cool yourself with cold water. Gradual temperature change only. Sudden cooling shocks the system and disturbs your internal balance. This concept of balanced body temperature regulation reflects the influence of traditional East Asian medicine on samurai health practices. Historical medical texts describe elaborate theories about how improper bathing could disrupt the body's internal harmony, leading to illness or weakness. Modern research on hypothermic conditioning actually supports some of these traditional practices, confirming that controlled exposure to heat stress can improve cardiovascular function and stimulate beneficial cellular adaptations. As you finally dress in the clean yukata, cotton robe, provided for evening activities, your body experiences competing sensations. Muscles simultaneously relax from the heat, yet still exhausted from the day's training. Skin tender from sunburn and scrubbing. headlight from the combination of heat exposure and inadequate hydration throughout the day. Baths are not for enjoyment, but for restoration of fighting capacity, reminds the senior student as you prepare to leave the bathing area. Your comfort is irrelevant. Your readiness for tomorrow's training is all that matters. With this sobering reminder of the utilitarian approach to even this most basic human need, you shuffle toward the dining hall for the evening meal. The bath has temporarily eased your physical discomfort, but the social and intellectual challenges it presented have only deepened your understanding of how thoroughly unprepared your modern conditioning has left you for the demands of samurai life. The brief moment of physical relief from the hot water is already fading as hunger makes itself known with renewed intensity. But as you'll soon discover, evening meals in the samurai household present their own elaborate challenges of etiquette and endurance. The dining hall glows with warm lamplight as you enter, your stomach growling audibly after a day of unprecedented physical exertion. The space is arranged similarly to the morning meal area, with low tables set in precise rows and seating positions clearly demarcating rank. You find your place at the lowest table, furthest from the raised platform where the masters dine. Evening meals are occasions for reflection and assessment, explains the senior student who has apparently taken on the thankless task of guiding you through this impossible day. Your behavior here reveals whether the day's lessons have penetrated or merely bounced off your thick skull. Historical records confirm that evening meals in samurai households were highly formalized affairs that served multiple purposes beyond simple nourishment. They provided opportunities to observe and evaluate character, reinforce social hierarchies, practice etiquette, and even demonstrate political alliances through seating arrangements. Some historical accounts describe how a samurai's future prospects could be significantly influenced by their conduct during these communal meals. As you settle onto your cushion, your legs protesting yet again at the familiar Caesar position, servants begin distributing trays with the evening meal. Your initial hope for a hearty dinner to replenish your depleted energy stores quickly evaporates as you see the portions. The meal consists of a small bowl of rice, a few slices of pickled vegetables, a tiny portion of grilled fish, and a clear soup with a single green leaf floating in it. The entire meal contains fewer calories than a modern energy bar. Modest evening portions ensure alert minds and untroubled sleep, the senior student informs you, noting your poorly concealed disappointment. Excessive food at day's end leads to sluggish morning training. This approach to portioning, heavier meals earlier in the day and lighter evening fare, actually aligns with some modern nutritional theories about optimal meal timing. One particularly quirky aspect of samurai dining that historians have documented involved deliberate undereating as a form of discipline. Historical training manuals advised warriors to leave the table before satisfaction is complete, to develop self-control and prepare the body for potential food scarcity during campaigns. Before eating begins, a brief ceremony of gratitude takes place. Each diner claps twice, bows slightly, and recites a traditional phrase, "Itadakimasu," literally, "I humbly receive." This practice acknowledges everyone who contributed to the meal's creation, from farmers to cooks. Scholars still debate whether this ritual developed primarily from Buddhist influence, with its emphasis on mindful gratitude, or from practical samurai philosophy about recognizing interdependence. Once again, elaborate etiquette governs every aspect of the meal. The order in which foods are consumed, the proper handling of utensils, even the angle at which you hold your soup bowl, all follow prescribed patterns that the other apprentices execute with practiced precision. Your clumsy attempts to mimic their movements earn subtle headshakes from those nearby. Soup is sipped directly from the bowl, not spooned, whispers the senior student. Fish is eaten from the top down, never starting with the middle. Rice bowl remains in the left hand throughout. These rules aren't arbitrary, but reflect deep cultural values about harmony, respect, and mindfulness. Modern etiquette experts note that Japanese dining customs developed to minimize disruption and maximize awareness of the communal experience. Every movement is designed to show consideration for others and appreciation for the food itself. The meal proceeds in near silence, with only occasional practical communications necessary for serving. This absence of mealtime conversation represents another stark contrast with your modern experience, where meals often happen amid constant chatter, screens, or other distractions. The enforced mindfulness makes each bite an exercise in presence. You actually taste the subtle flavors in the simple foods, noticing textures and temperatures you would normally overlook. Midway through the meal, an unexpected test occurs. The master at the head table calls your name, asking a question about the day's philosophy lesson. All eyes turn to you as you struggle to swallow a mouthful of rice and formulate a coherent response about a concept you barely grasped when it was presented, let alone after hours of subsequent physical and mental taxation. Your answer is painfully inadequate, a garbled attempt to recall terminology without understanding that reveals the superficiality of your comprehension. The master's expression doesn't change, but the silence that follows your response speaks volumes. After a moment that feels like eternity, he simply nods and returns to his meal. You've been evaluated and found wanting, all without a single direct criticism. Historical accounts describe how these public examinations serve both educational and social purposes. They reinforce the expectation of constant mental readiness, regardless of physical state, and publicly established intellectual hierarchies among students. Modern educational psychology might question the effectiveness of learning under such pressure, but samurai pedagogy prioritized performance under stress as a core skill. As the sparse meal continues, you notice another distinctive feature of samurai dining: the careful attention to aesthetic presentation. Despite the modest portions, each item is arranged with artistic consideration. The single leaf in your soup isn't random, but placed to suggest a seasonal motif. The slices of pickled vegetable are cut in precise shapes that complement their colors. This attention to visual harmony reflects the samurai belief that refinement should infuse every aspect of life, not merely formal arts. Finish everything, reminds the senior student as you contemplate leaving a bit of the bitter pickled radish. Waste is disrespect to those who provided the food and weakness of character in the warrior. The concept of mottainai, the sense that waste is morally wrong, runs deep in Japanese culture and was particularly emphasized in samurai education. Historical documents describe how samurai households kept meticulous records of consumption and severely punished any form of waste, whether of food, materials, or time. Modern environmental advocates have actually revived this concept as a philosophical foundation for sustainability practices. By the time the meal concludes, your hunger has been partially, but not completely satisfied, exactly as intended. The mild discomfort of slight hunger is meant to be carried through the evening as another form of awareness training. Complete comfort, you're beginning to realize, is viewed as the enemy of vigilance in samurai philosophy. After the meal, each student is responsible for cleaning their own eating implements. Another lesson in self-sufficiency and respect for materials. The proper rinsing and drying of bowls and chopsticks follows specific protocols that, like everything else in this world, you struggle to execute correctly. Your bowls should be dried in the order they were used, not the order that seems convenient to you, corrects the supervising senior. Pattern creates discipline in small things that transfers to large things. As you finally complete the elaborate post-meal rituals and prepare to move toward evening activities, your body sends competing signals, partially nourished but still calorie deficient, muscles simultaneously relaxed from the bath yet deeply fatigued, mind simultaneously clearer from food yet fogged with accumulated exhaustion. The senior student notes your swaying posture with a mix of amusement and resignation. In the old days, meals were even simpler during training periods, he informs you. Sometimes just rice and pickles. The body learns to extract maximum energy from minimum input. Your modern stomach, accustomed to excess, must be retrained like everything else about you. With this encouraging assessment, you're directed toward the evening study hall, where yet another form of demanding training awaits. The modest meal sits in your stomach like a small stone, present but insufficient, as you shuffle toward your next challenge. Memory training that will expose just how thoroughly digital dependence has compromised your cognitive capabilities. The evening study hall occupies a corner of the main compound, a spare room illuminated by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the tatami floor. Low desks are arranged in rows, each holding a brush, inkstone, and stack of thin rice paper. As you take your assigned place, your body cries out for rest after the day's relentless trials. Instead, you're about to discover that the evening brings no reprieve, only a shift from physical to mental exertion that will prove equally punishing to your modern brain. Tonight we practice memory and recitation, announces the elderly instructor, a scholarly samurai whose frail appearance belies the sharpness of his mind and tongue. The warrior who cannot remember correctly cannot learn correctly. Historical records confirm that memory training formed a crucial component of samurai education. In a world without digital storage or easy access to written materials, the ability to accurately memorize large amounts of information was not merely academic but practical and sometimes life-saving. Battle instructions, clan histories, strategic maps, and philosophical texts all needed to be internalized rather than referenced. The first exercise seems deceptively simple. The instructor recites a series of 8 names, historical figures from samurai lineages, and you must write them down in correct order after a single hearing. Your confident smile fades as you realize you've already forgotten the 3rd name by the time he reaches the 6th. Your attempt at reconstruction is pathetic. 3 names correct, 2 misspelled, and 3 completely missing. Again, sighs the instructor, reading the same list. Your second attempt is marginally better, but still riddled with errors. The other apprentices, meanwhile, produce flawless records, their brushwork neat and confident compared to your clumsy scrawling. Your mind is like a leaking bucket, observes the instructor. Modern convenience has atrophied your natural memory capacity. Before writing existed, humans routinely memorized epic poems thousands of lines long. Your ancestors had this capacity. It remains within you, buried under layers of dependence on external memory aids. He's not wrong. Modern neuroscience confirms that regular memory exercise strengthens recall capacity, while dependency on external memory aids can weaken it. One particularly quirky aspect of traditional memory training that historians have documented involved the creation of mental memory palaces, visualizing familiar architectural spaces and populating them with vivid images representing information to be recalled. This technique, developed independently across multiple ancient cultures, has been proven remarkably effective by contemporary cognitive science. The next memory challenge escalates in difficulty. The instructor reads a passage from a classical text on strategy, a dense paragraph filled with specialized terminology and complex syntax. You're expected to reproduce it verbatim after a single recitation. Your attempt is disastrous. Fragmentary phrases strung together with gaps and inventions that change the meaning entirely. the instructor's expression conveys a perfect blend of disappointment and confirmation of his lowest expectations. In battle, misremembering one instruction might mean death for many, he reminds the class. Memory is not a parlor trick, but a survival skill. Scholarly debate continues about whether intense memory training, developed primarily for practical military purposes or for cultural preservation in a largely oral tradition. What historians agree on is that samurai were expected to memorize vast amounts of material spanning practical combat techniques, clan histories, etiquette protocols, and philosophical concepts. After several more humiliating memory exercises, the training shifts to recitation. Each student must stand and recite from memory a portion of text they've been studying over previous weeks. As a newcomer, you're spared this particular ordeal, but watching others perform provides a sobering demonstration of what's expected. One student recites a complex battle formation description, including precise positioning for different units, timing of movements, and contingency plans, all from memory without hesitation or error. Another performs a word-perfect recitation of a philosophical text, complete with proper intonation that conveys subtle shades of meaning. Their performances aren't mere rote repetition, but demonstrate deep comprehension of the material. Memory without understanding is useless, explains the instructor, noting your awestruck expression. We do not train parrots here, but warriors who must apply knowledge in chaotic situations. This integration of memorization with practical application reflects a sophisticated approach to cognitive development that modern educational psychology has only recently begun to re-emphasize. Historical training manuals describe how samurai students were required not only to memorize techniques, but to demonstrate them in increasingly unpredictable scenarios, forcing adaptive application rather than rigid reproduction. Your next challenge involves a memory game used to train both recall and observation. 20 small objects are arranged on a tray, displayed briefly, then covered. You must list everything you saw in the correct arrangement. Your performance is predictably poor. You recall perhaps half the objects and almost none of their positions relative to each other. Your eyes saw everything, but your mind registered little, comments the instructor. Modern life has trained you to look without seeing, to scan without absorbing. Your attention flits from surface to surface like an insect, never penetrating to essence. One particularly fascinating aspect of traditional observation training involved practices we now associate with mindfulness meditation. Historical documents describe exercises where apprentices would spend hours observing a single object, a flower, stone, or weapon, with complete attention, noting every detail of its appearance, function, and significance. Modern psychological research confirms that such practices significantly enhance perceptual processing and memory encoding. As the memory training continues, your mental fatigue becomes as palpable as the physical exhaustion accumulated throughout the day. Your ability to concentrate deteriorates with each exercise, creating a vicious cycle of increased effort, producing diminishing results. The instructor observes your struggle with clinical detachment. The untrained mind tires quickly. Like untrained muscles, it lacks endurance. Yet you must function mentally even when physically exhausted. In battle, clear thinking amid bodily distress determines survival. This deliberate layering of mental demands on top of physical fatigue represents another sophisticated aspect of samurai pedagogy. Historical training accounts describe how intellectual challenges were often deliberately presented when students were at their physical limits, conditioning them to maintain cognitive function regardless of bodily state. Modern military training employs similar techniques, confirming their effectiveness in developing mental resilience. By the end of the memory training session, your brain feels as thoroughly pummeled as your body. The gap between your performance and that of the other apprentices couldn't be more stark. They've demonstrated remarkable cognitive abilities that seem almost superhuman from your perspective. Yet the instructor insists these capacities are natural human endowments, merely developed through consistent practice, rather than allowed to atrophy through dependence on external aids. In the age of scrolls, a samurai needed strong memory. In the age of computers, a human needs it even more, he concludes cryptically. When external systems fail, only what lives within you remains accessible. As the evening study session finally concludes, you rise unsteadily from your seated position, your mind reeling with failed attempts at memorization, your body complaining from the day's accumulated abuse. The contrast between your modern cognitive habits, skimming, outsourcing memory to devices, divided attention, and the focused, internalized approach to knowledge required here could not be more stark. And yet, as you shuffle toward the dormitory for what you desperately hope is the final challenge of this impossible day, a small part of you wonders what your mind might be capable of if trained with such rigor. The glimpse of potential human capacity you've witnessed is both humbling and intriguing, though at the moment mostly humbling. The day's seemingly endless trials have brought you finally to what should be its most welcome phase, evening rest. Your body and mind plead for the oblivion of sleep as you're led toward the dormitory area. Yet even this most basic human need, you're about to discover, comes wrapped in layers of protocol and challenge that your exhausted state is poorly equipped to navigate. Evening is not merely for physical rest, but for spiritual integration, explains the dormitory supervisor, a senior student whose perpetually perfect posture makes you wonder if he sleeps standing up like a horse. The day's lessons must be properly processed before sleep is permitted. Historical records confirm that samurai training regimens viewed sleep not as a right, but as a strategic resource to be optimized. Sleep patterns, like everything else in warrior culture, were subject to systematic regulations designed to develop specific qualities. Some historical accounts describe how apprentices were sometimes awakened at random intervals to test alertness, or required to sleep in uncomfortable positions to maintain battle readiness. The sleeping hall itself defies your expectations of comfort. Instead of private quarters, you enter a large open room with thin sleeping mats, futons, arranged in neat rows along the floor. The spacing between mats is precise, close enough for awareness of others, but far enough for minimal movement disturbance. Mosquito netting hangs from the ceiling, creating translucent divisions in the dim lamplight. First, evening meditation and breathing exercises, announces the supervisor, dashing your hopes for immediate collapse into unconsciousness. Proper preparation of the mind ensures efficient rest and meaningful dreams. This concept of sleep preparation represents another stark contrast with modern habits. Contemporary sleep experts have only recently begun emphasizing the importance of deliberate wind-down routines, while samurai culture institutionalized this practice centuries ago. One particularly quirky aspect of traditional sleep preparation that historians have documented involved specific breathing patterns believed to activate different energy systems within the body, techniques that modern research partially validates for their effects on the autonomic nervous system. You join the other apprentices in kneeling for guided breathing exercises, fighting to stay upright as your exhausted body sways slightly. The instructions seem simple enough. Breathe deeply from the lower abdomen, counting inhalations and exhalations in specific patterns. Yet your diaphragm, like every other muscle today, seems to have developed a stubborn resistance to following commands. Breathe from the tandon, the center point below your navel, instructs the supervisor, noticing your shallow chest breathing. Modern people breathe like frightened rabbits, always from the upper chest, always half panicked. Warrior breathing is deep, slow, complete. After 20 minutes of breathing exercises that leave you lightheaded in your fatigued state, the next sleep preparation ritual begins, the evening recitation. Each apprentice must verbally summarize one lesson learned during the day, demonstrating reflection and integration of experience. As the newest student, you're called upon first, putting your foggy brain on immediate display. Your mumbled observation about sword grip technique is deemed inadequate. Surface observation only, critiques the supervisor. What principle underlies the technique? How does it connect to larger concepts? Reflection without depth is merely memory, not understanding. Scholarly debate continues about whether these evening reflections were primarily pedagogical, reinforcing learning through verbalization, or more deeply philosophical, developing the metacognitive awareness considered essential to warrior wisdom. Historical training texts suggest both purposes were served, creating a practice that simultaneously strengthened practical knowledge and developed higher-order thinking. Following the recitations comes another unexpected requirement: nighttime stretching. When your body is screaming for horizontal collapse, you're instead led through a series of gentle but thorough stretches, targeting the major muscle groups stressed during the day's training. Modern sports science actually confirms the benefits of this practice, as proper stretching can significantly reduce muscle soreness and improve recovery during sleep. The body remembers what the mind forgets, explains the supervisor, as you struggle through a particularly uncomfortable hamstring stretch. Tomorrow's training builds on today's. Without proper evening care, accumulated tension creates cumulative damage. Finally, after what feels like an eternity of preliminaries, you're permitted to prepare your sleeping space. This too comes with specific protocols. The thin futon must be unfolded and positioned precisely, aligned with the room's orientation. The simple cotton bedding must be arranged according to season and temperature. In this case, a single light covering appropriate for summer warmth. Your few personal items must be placed in exact positions relative to the sleeping mat, both for practical access and symbolic significance. A warrior's sleeping space reflects his mind, observes the supervisor, frowning at your haphazard arrangement. Disorder around you creates disorder within you. This emphasis on environmental order reflects core principles of samurai philosophy that extended well beyond mere tidiness. Historical accounts describe how warriors were expected to maintain precise organization of all possessions, with the belief that external discipline both reflected and reinforced internal discipline. Modern psychological research has partially validated this connection, finding correlations between environmental order and mental clarity. As you finally lie down on your assigned futon, a new discomfort immediately presents itself. The sleeping mat is shockingly thin, perhaps 2 inches of cotton batting that does almost nothing to cushion your body from the hard wooden floor beneath. Your modern spine, accustomed to plush mattresses with memory foam toppers, registers this as something approaching torture. Excessive comfort weakens the body, explains the supervisor when he notices your shifting discomfort. Hard sleeping surfaces maintain proper alignment and prevent the deep unconsciousness that leaves a warrior vulnerable to surprise. This approach to sleep surfaces has interesting historical context. Some training traditions deliberately rotated sleeping conditions, sometimes providing comfortable bedding, sometimes bare floors, to prevent warriors from becoming dependent on any particular sleep environment. The goal was to develop what modern military training calls sleep adaptability, the ability to achieve restorative rest under varied and sometimes adverse conditions. Your exhaustion eventually overwhelms your discomfort, and you begin drifting towards sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sharp clap. "Sleep position," announces the supervisor. All apprentices immediately shift to a specific sleeping posture. Right side, right arm extended slightly, left arm bent with hand near the heart, legs slightly bent. You clumsily attempt to mimic this position. The right side sleeping posture allows quickest rising in emergency, keeps the heart unburdened, and permits the sword arm to move freely, explains the supervisor. Modern people flop about like dying fish when they sleep. Warriors maintain awareness even in rest. This prescribed sleeping position actually has cross-cultural historical precedent. Various warrior traditions across cultures favored specific sleep postures for similar practical reasons, and some traditional medical systems, including Chinese medicine, prescribed side sleeping as most beneficial for organ function. Modern sleep science offers mixed validation, confirming certain benefits of side sleeping while emphasizing that some positional variation is natural and beneficial. As the oil lamps are extinguished and darkness envelops the dormitory, a final surprise awaits. Complete silence is mandated, not merely an absence of conversation, but an active suppression of all sleep sounds. Snoring, restless movement, even heavy breathing are considered disruptions subject to correction. Historical accounts describe how apprentices who consistently disturbed others' rest were sometimes required to sleep in isolation as both punishment and remedial training. In the darkness, your overtaxed body finally begins surrendering to sleep, despite the unfamiliar hardness beneath you and the restrictive prescribed position. Just as consciousness begins to fade, the supervisor's voice cuts through the silence one final time. "Remember, dawn comes at the hour of the tiger. Those who rise late face consequences." With this ominous reminder echoing in your fading awareness, you finally slip into sleep, your modern body and mind utterly defeated by a single day in the life you could never endure. And as uncomfortable as your current state is, you haven't yet experienced the final insult this system has to offer, the brutal awakening that will come all too soon. The wooden clapper shatters your desperately needed sleep like a hammer through glass. Disoriented and groggy, you struggle to orient yourself in the pre-dawn darkness. Your body, expecting the customary 8 hours of rest it's accustomed to, has received barely 5, and those on a surface that makes airport terminal floors seem luxurious by comparison. "Rise! Prepare for morning training!" The dormitory supervisor's voice cuts through the darkness with unnecessary volume and enthusiasm. Around you, other apprentices are already moving with practiced efficiency, folding bedding, arranging possessions, and preparing for the day ahead. Your own movements are clumsy and painfully slow, your muscles having stiffened dramatically overnight on the unyielding sleeping surface. Historical records confirm that sleep deprivation was a deliberate component of samurai training regimens. The practice served multiple purposes: developing mental clarity under suboptimal conditions, simulating the sleep disruption common during military campaigns, and testing psychological resilience. Some historical accounts describe how senior students would observe how quickly apprentices could transition from sleep to full alertness, considering this a key indicator of warrior potential. "You have 3 minutes to complete morning preparations," announces the supervisor. This timeline seems physically impossible given your current state, yet somehow the other apprentices are already halfway dressed in fresh training clothes, their bedding immaculately folded and stored. Your attempts to follow suit are pathetically inadequate. Your fingers feel swollen and uncooperative as you struggle with the unfamiliar ties of the training uniform. Your bedding, when folded, resembles a lumpy sack rather than the perfect rectangles produced by your peers. Your hair, unwashed and wild from sleep, refuses to be tamed into the neat top knot required for training. "Time!" calls the supervisor. You're nowhere near ready, still half-dressed with bedding partially folded and personal items scattered haphazardly. This failure earns you your first assignment of the new day, 20 extra sword cuts during morning practice. The cycle of inadequacy continues without interruption, from one day into the next. One particularly quirky aspect of morning protocols documented by historians involved the practice of cold water purification. Apprentices would rinse their mouths and splash their faces with ice-cold water immediately upon waking. This practice, explained in training manuals as both symbolic purification and practical stimulation, has interesting parallels in modern sports psychology, where cold exposure is sometimes used to trigger alertness and boost circulation. As you stumble outside for this ritual, the water is shockingly cold in the pre-dawn air. Rather than refreshing you, it sends your system into a minor state of shock. Meanwhile, the senior students splash their faces vigorously, seemingly energized rather than traumatized by the frigid dousing. "Cold water reveals character," observes the supervisor, noticing your flinching response. Some shrink from discomfort. Others use it as fuel. The difference is not physical, but mental. The physical discomfort of this abrupt awakening is compounded by psychological distress as you realize a horrifying truth. This is just the beginning of another full day of training, identical to the one you barely survived yesterday. And tomorrow will bring another, and the next day, another still. Scholarly accounts suggest that formal samurai apprenticeships typically lasted between 7 and 15 years, with the most intensive physical training concentrated in the early years. As the apprentices gather for morning exercises in the training yard, your body protests every movement. Muscles you didn't know existed announce their presence through sharp complaints. The blisters on your hands from sword practice have hardened overnight into painful calluses that crack and bleed as you grip the practice weapon. The sunburn on your exposed skin from yesterday's outdoor training has transformed into a tight, painful mask that restricts your facial expressions. Second-day pain is merely the body's resistance to change, explains the training master, noticing your grimaces. By the 5th day, these pains will seem insignificant. By the 50th, you will have forgotten they ever existed. This progression from acute distress to adaptation does have scientific basis. Modern exercise physiology confirms that the body's initial inflammatory response to unaccustomed exertion gradually transitions to adaptive hypertrophy and neural efficiency. What the training master doesn't mention is the number of apprentices who never reach that adaptation point, those whose bodies or spirits break before the transformation can occur. Historical records provide sobering context for your struggles. Samurai training had significant attrition rates, with many apprentices abandoning the path due to injury, inadequate constitution, or psychological breakdown. Some historical accounts describe how dojo entrances would sometimes display the broken weapons or abandoned personal items of failed apprentices as warnings to those who remained. As morning exercises begin, your performance is even worse than yesterday. Fatigue compounds your lack of conditioning and proper technique. Movements that were merely difficult yesterday are nearly impossible today as your overtaxed muscles fail to respond properly to commands. The training master observes your deterioration with clinical detachment. The second day reveals much, he notes to another instructor. Some flame brightly on the first day, then extinguish completely on the second. Others burn steadily, growing stronger with each challenge. This one, he leaves the assessment unspoken, but his expression completes the thought. Your prospects appear dim indeed. This systematic pushing to failure wasn't merely brutal hazing, but a deliberate pedagogical strategy. Historical training manuals describe how apprentices were routinely taken beyond their perceived limits to discover their actual breaking points. Modern sports psychology has partially validated this approach, confirming that properly structured overreaching can reveal capacities that remain hidden under normal training conditions. As the morning progresses, you face a choice that every samurai apprentice eventually confronted: continue despite the pain, or surrender to it. Modern motivational culture might frame this as pushing through or mental toughness, but the reality is far more complex. What samurai training demanded wasn't simply endurance, but a fundamental reconceptualization of the relationship between discomfort and identity. The untrained mind says, "I am in pain," explains the philosophy master during a brief rest period. The trained mind observes, "There is pain." The difference seems small, but contains the entire secret of warrior consciousness. This distinction reflects core principles of Buddhist philosophy that heavily influenced samurai psychology. The concept of non-identification with sensory experience, observing pain rather than becoming it, represented a radical departure from instinctive human responses. Modern mindfulness practices incorporate similar principles, though rarely with the intense physical application demanded in warrior training. By midday, your body has reached a crisis point. Dehydration from inadequate water intake combines with accumulated fatigue, muscle damage, and psychological stress to create a state approaching systemic failure. Modern medical professionals would likely diagnose rhabdomyolysis, overtraining syndrome, or severe stress reaction, conditions requiring immediate intervention. Here, your obvious distress earns no special treatment, only closer observation to ensure you don't damage equipment if you collapse. As you struggle through another sword drilling session, vision occasionally blurring at the edges, an older instructor finally approaches. His weathered face shows neither sympathy nor cruelty, merely assessment. "You have reached the barrier," he states simply. "Every apprentice finds it sooner or later. Some never pass beyond it. What matters is not whether you feel you can continue. You cannot. What matters is whether you continue despite that knowledge." This concept of the barrier, the psychological wall where rational assessment concludes that continuation is impossible, appears repeatedly in samurai training literature. Historical accounts describe various approaches to this critical juncture, from compassionate guidance to merciless pressure. What remained consistent was the belief that this barrier represented the essential threshold between ordinary consciousness and warrior consciousness. As afternoon brings yet more training, your movements become increasingly automated, a protective mechanism your system employs to continue functioning despite overwhelming fatigue. Modern sports science recognizes this state as a form of dissociation, where the conscious mind partially detaches from bodily experience as a survival strategy during extreme exertion. "You begin to understand," observes the swordmaster, noticing this shift. "The body moves best when the thinking mind steps aside. Remember this feeling. It is the beginning of true learning." As the second day of your impossible apprenticeship draws toward evening, a strange transformation occurs. The intensity of your suffering creates a kind of clarity, pain so complete it becomes almost transcendent. In this state, you experience brief moments of the awareness your instructors have described. Flashes of movement without thought, action without hesitation, presence without judgment. These moments don't represent mastery or even basic competence. Your techniques remain fundamentally flawed, but they offer a fleeting glimpse of what might be possible beyond the barrier of conventional limitations. Modern psychologists might identify this as an altered state induced by stress hormones and endorphins, but the experience itself transcends clinical categorization. The samurai path offered this paradoxical promise. Through systematic dismantling of physical and psychological comfort, through relentless confrontation with limitation, through disciplines that modern sensibilities would consider somewhere between extreme sport and sanctioned torture, ordinary humans could access extraordinary capacities. As darkness falls on your second day, a day you could never have completed in your actual conditioned state, the philosophy master offers a final observation that encapsulates the fundamental challenge of samurai training for the modern human. The path is not about becoming something different, but about unbecoming what prevents your true nature from manifesting. The warrior exists already within you, buried beneath layers of comfort, convenience, and compromise. Our task is not to create something new, but to reveal what lies beneath what has been added. With these words echoing in your consciousness, you prepare for another night on the unyielding sleeping mat, your body a constellation of pain points, your mind hovering somewhere between breakdown and breakthrough. And as sleep finally claims you, one certainty remains. No matter how many lifetimes of conditioning you might undergo, your modern constitution, physical, psychological, and philosophical, would never truly endure the path of the samurai. The demands were not merely difficult, but alien, not just challenging your capabilities, but contradicting your fundamental assumptions about comfort, identity, and purpose. The samurai path required not merely extraordinary effort, but extraordinary reconceptualization, a complete rewiring of the relationship between self and experience that modern individualistic psychology has rendered nearly incomprehensible. And as your consciousness fades into exhausted sleep, you realize the most humbling truth. The samurai apprentices who surrounded you, the ones who executed techniques with precision while you floundered, who maintained proper posture while you collapsed, who recited complex passages while you mumbled, weren't superhuman. They were simply humans shaped by a different system, ordinary people whose extraordinary capabilities emerged from the crucible of disciplines no longer valued or even comprehended in the modern world. The room has grown darker now, the sound of my voice the only thing filling the space. Your eyelids have grown heavy, your breathing deeper and more regular. The tension has melted from your shoulders and brow as you've journeyed with me through this impossible apprenticeship. What began as a thought experiment about physical endurance has revealed something deeper. How profoundly our modern conditioning shapes not just what we can do, but how we understand ourselves. The samurai path wasn't merely difficult, it was built on fundamentally different assumptions about human purpose and potential. As you drift closer to sleep, perhaps there's comfort in knowing that while you could never endure their training, you've absorbed a fragment of their wisdom, that our limitations are rarely where we believe them to be, that discomfort contains hidden teachings, and that the path to extraordinary capacity often begins with ordinary discipline. The samurai understood that true rest isn't merely the absence of effort, but the integration of experience. As your consciousness gently fades, allow the day's lessons to settle into your dreams, where ancient wisdom and modern understanding might find common ground in the quiet landscape of sleep. The barriers between their world and ours, between their capabilities and our limitations, between their understanding and our assumptions, all grow soft and permeable in this twilight state between waking and dreaming. Your journey as a samurai apprentice ends here, but perhaps some echo of their discipline and insight remains, a whispered challenge to discover what lies beyond your own assumed limitations. Rest now, knowing you've walked a path few modern humans could endure, even in imagination. The samurai would tell you that this recognition itself is the beginning of wisdom.